Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The low hum of the air conditioner filled the silence as Staff Sergeant Maya Torres stood just inside the doorway of Naval Special Warfare Command. Sunlight poured through the high windows, cutting sharp angles across the polished floor, where men in tan uniforms leaned over a range map, talking quietly. She adjusted the strap of her duffel and waited. No one turned to greet her. A clipboard officer glanced up, saw her name tag, then went back to his notes without a word. The familiar quiet sting of dismissal. Maya had felt it before in basic on deployment, even after her second commendation. You learn to stop taking it personally. You just learn to listen, observe, wait. Her transport had barely cooled on the tarmac when the call came. Report for evaluation, 900 hours. No further details. No explanation of why she'd been requested by the SEALs, a unit that rarely welcomed outsiders, much less an Army sniper. When Colonel Briggs finally appeared, he didn't shake her hand, didn't even pretend to. He was tall, gray at the temples, shoulders like stone, a career SEAL who had lived more years under classified orders than most soldiers served in total. His eyes moved over her uniform, noting the faded patches, the lean build, the weathered rifle case in her hand. Then his expression hardened. "Staff Sergeant Torres." "Sir." "You're here for evaluation." "Yes, sir." He nodded once, slow, deliberate. "Your file says you've got combat experience, 2 deployments, Afghanistan, longest confirmed at 1,800 meters. "Yes, sir." He lowered the tablet he'd been reading. "Most shooters here average past 2,500. I hope you're not expecting an easy day." Her reply came quiet, even. "No, sir." Behind him, 3 instructors stood in loose formation. One, Lieutenant Dalton, muttered just loud enough for her to hear, "$20 says she doesn't make it past equipment check." The others smirked. Briggs didn't react, but he didn't stop them either. He just studied her, the stillness in her posture, the steady calm in her face. No bravado, no excuses, nothing to prove aloud. That silence unsettled him more than arrogance ever could. "Rodriguez," he said to the man on his left, a weathered master chief with sun-scorched skin. "Get her checked in. Range 60600 tomorrow." "Yes, sir." As Torres followed Rodriguez across the compound, the instructors' laughter trailed behind her. She didn't turn. She'd heard worse from men who later asked for her wind calls. That night the barracks were quiet except for the faint hum of generators and the whisper of wind off the coast. The air smelled faintly of salt and machine oil. Maya sat on the edge of the narrow bunk, her rifle spread across a cleaning mat piece by piece, gleaming under the pale light. The stock was worn smooth where her hand rested, the metal dark from years of use. Every scratch told a story, and she knew them all. She cleaned each part with the same ritual calm she'd practiced for years. Barrel, bolt, scope, trigger assembly, each movement slow, deliberate, sacred in its precision. This wasn't superstition. It was preparation. A mental narrowing of focus until the rest of the world, the voices, the skepticism, the noise, dissolved into background static. "You've done this before." Her father's voice echoed in memory, a Colorado wind and the sound of tin cans falling from fence posts. "Don't fight the wind, kid. Read it. Let it tell you what it's doing." That lesson had followed her through everything. Through training, through deployment, through the long nights in Kandahar where silence and death often shared the same breath. She ran a patch down the bore and checked the reflection in the scope. Perfect. Not a smudge, not a speck of dust. By the time she locked the case shut, the compound lights had dimmed. Outside, the ocean wind pressed against the window screens, and for a moment she let herself close her eyes. Tomorrow wasn't about beating anyone. It was about control, about doing what she always did, letting her work speak where words never could. She lay back on the bunk and stared at the ceiling. The doubts of others were predictable, What mattered was how long it took for them to realize the truth. The alarm buzzed at 500. She was already awake. In the pre-dawn quiet, she dressed in silence, boots laced tight, uniform crisp, hair pinned back. Her breath came steady as she lifted the rifle case and stepped into the corridor. The air outside was cold and damp, the kind of chill that sharpened thought. By the time the first light stretched over the horizon, the range had come alive. Wind flags hung motionless in the gray calm, and the smell of cordite lingered faintly from earlier drills. Several SEALs were already prepping their equipment. They turned as she walked past, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and dismissal. She could feel it in the air, the unspoken judgment that came before performance. "Staff Sergeant Torres," a voice called. Rodriguez approached, clipboard in hand, eyes studying her gear. "Morning, Master Chief. Let's see what you brought." She set the case on the bench and opened it. The rifle gleamed in the morning light, a custom build she'd assembled over 3 years of deployments and leave days. Every component was tested, every variable measured. Rodriguez handled it with the reverence of someone who understood. Bartline barrel, surgeon action, Schmidt and Bender optic, hand loads. "Yes, Master Chief. Hornady bullets, 43.5 grains Varget, Lapua brass, Federal primers, all measured to the 10th. He raised an eyebrow, nodding slowly. "You load your own." "Yes, Master Chief. Consistency improves when you control every variable." He handed the rifle back. "Good answer." A pause. "You nervous?" She shook her head. "No, Master Chief, just focused." "Good." The safety briefing was standard, but he watched her closely. She listened without distraction, eyes following every instruction, body language composed. Not defensive, not proud, just ready. By 600, 8 shooters were lined along the firing mats. The sun crept over the horizon, turning the desert range gold. Briggs climbed the observation platform with his instructors and binoculars. His voice carried easily across the open space. "Today's exercise is standard qualification. Known distances. 5 rounds at 500, then 1,000. No excuses. Begin when ready." Dalton smirked down the line. "Try not to hit the dirt, Sergeant." Maya ignored him. She lay prone, adjusting the bipod, the rear bag, her cheek welled. Her breathing slowed. 500 meters. Wind steady at 3 miles per hour from the left. Temperature 62. She made the mental math automatically, adjusting elevation and windage with practiced fingers. She exhaled, pressed the trigger. The rifle kicked gently against her shoulder. The suppressed report cracked through the air, soft, controlled. She cycled the bolt, loaded another round. 4 more shots, each steady, each timed with her breath. From the platform, Instructor Chun called scores. Dalton 5 for 5 center mass, Johnson 5 for 5, Martinez 4, Torres 5 for 5 center. A faint murmur rose from the line. Briggs lifted his binoculars and studied her target himself. 5 perfect holes clustered in a 3-inch group. He said nothing, but Rodriguez saw the subtle shift in his expression, that first crack in expectation. "Let's move to 1,000, Briggs ordered. The shooters repositioned. The terrain opened into uneven ridges, the wind beginning to stir. Maya adjusted for bullet drop, for temperature, for the faint shimmer of mirage on the distant steel plate. The first shot broke cleanly. A heartbeat later, the faint clang of impact echoed back. Then another, then another. "Torres 5 for 5, 1,000 meters, Chun called. This time even Dalton looked over. Surprise flickered behind the smirk. Maya stood, cleared her rifle, and walked calmly to the bench. She didn't look at anyone, didn't need to. By noon, the exercises grew harder. Unknown distances, wind shifts, targets hidden behind scrub and ridges, no rangefinders, no spotters. 3 minutes to locate, estimate, and engage, Chun briefed. You miss, you move on. The sun climbed high, burning the air into shimmering waves. Mirage danced like heat ghosts, bending light and distance alike. Dalton went first. His first shot landed low, 6 inches off. He cursed softly. Mirage threw me off. Others followed, some hits, more misses. When Maya's turn came, she lay flat and quiet, scanning through her scope. The world narrowed to glass and breath. Her mind filtered through layers of experience, wind behavior, terrain slope, heat shimmer. Target half-hidden silhouette. Estimated 1,215 meters. Wind 5 miles per hour southwest. Slight rise, minor depression. She adjusted elevation 10.8 mils, then waited for the lull between gusts. 2 minutes 40 seconds, trigger press. The sound came back distant but certain. Hit, center mass. 1215 confirmed, Chun reported. Rodriguez glanced at Briggs, who said nothing, though his jaw flexed once. She cleared her rifle, stood, and stepped back. Dalton watched her, eyes narrowed, the first hint of respect cutting through the earlier arrogance. By the end of the day, the range was quiet again. The smell of oil and dust hung heavy in the air. Briggs descended from the platform, his shadow long across the dirt. He stopped near her as she wiped down her rifle. Consistent performance today, Staff Sergeant. Yes, sir. Tomorrow, advanced scenarios. Over 2,000 meters. The wind's going to get ugly. I'll be ready, sir. He studied her face for a long moment, searching for something, perhaps nerves, perhaps pride. But there was only calm acceptance. He nodded once and turned away. As the others packed up, Maya lingered. She opened her small notebook, her data book, and began logging the day. Distance, wind, temperature, grouping, deviation. She marked each page with neat, precise handwriting, her memory of each shot sharp and intact. When she finally set the pen down, the sun was sinking behind the ridgeline. Tomorrow, they'd expect her to fail, to find her limit. But she'd already learned the truth long ago. Limits only existed until you measured them yourself. She closed the book, placed it beside her rifle, and whispered softly into the dim air. Watch and learn. She stood alone in the half-light of dawn, a single figure against the wide, restless horizon. The wind had arrived early. It rolled across the range in long, uneven breaths, kicking dust into the air and twisting the flags on their poles. Staff Sergeant Maya Torres stood with her rifle case at her side, watching the movement, calm, patient, eyes tracking the rhythm like a musician learning a difficult piece by ear. The others arrived in small groups. Their laughter cut through the wind like bright flashes of arrogance. She didn't join in. She just studied the air. 8 to 12 miles an hour, gusting. Variable crosswind mid-range. Mirage distortion by 9 a.m. She ran the numbers silently, committing them to muscle memory before a single bullet had left its case. By the time Colonel Briggs appeared on the platform, his clipboard tucked under one arm, the air was already alive with tension. Everyone knew what was coming, the long-distance evaluations. The day that separated shooters who qualified from those who actually belonged. 2,000 meters, he called out. That's where we start. If you can't connect there, you're done for the day. His voice carried authority born from decades of battlefield precision. He wasn't angry, just immovable. The kind of man who didn't raise his voice because he didn't have to. Dalton smirked from 2 stations down. 2,000 in this wind, that's suicide. Maya didn't look at him. She unfolded the bipod, checked her torque settings, and felt the familiar cool weight of her rifle settle against her shoulder. Her world narrowed, scope, target, wind, flag. Everything else fell away. Dalton fired first. The sound cracked through the air, echoing over dry ridges. Through her scope, Maya tracked the dust plume 4 feet off to the right. A miss. His second was closer. His third finally struck with a hollow metallic ring. 3 shots to hit, Chun reported from the spotting scope. The others took their turns. Some connected, most didn't. At this range, luck masqueraded as skill, and even the best missed more than they hit. When her name came, she didn't rush. She made one final wind call, felt the gust shift against her cheek, and pressed the trigger. The rifle bucked, gentle, controlled. 3 seconds later, the target rang, clean, center mass. "Hit, first round," Chun said, his voice tight with disbelief. A pause rippled through the line. For the first time, even Briggs lowered his binoculars and just watched her, the way she didn't celebrate, didn't even look up. She chambered another round, adjusted windage by half a click, and waited for the next lull. Another shot, another clang. Then another. Each impact rang out like punctuation, marks on a quiet truth that no one had wanted to admit. 5 rounds, 5 hits, 2,000 meters. First-day perfection extended into the second. Behind her, Dalton muttered under his breath, "That's not possible." But the range didn't care what was possible. It only cared about results. By mid-morning, the exercise moved to 2,200 meters. The wind had grown erratic, shifting, snarling, cutting across the range in unpredictable spirals. The air shimmered with heat. Mirage blurred the targets until they looked like ghosts on the hillside. Maya studied it all in silence. Her breathing was steady, her pulse low. The trick wasn't to fight the wind, it was to understand it. She waded through 3 gust cycles, watching each flag twist and recover. There, a pattern, a rhythm buried in the chaos. She pressed the trigger during the quiet heartbeat between gusts. The rifle whispered, the wind hesitated, the steel plates sang. "Hit, low center," Chun reported. Briggs's binoculars stayed on her the whole time. He didn't speak, but his expression had shifted, skepticism replaced by something quieter. Respect, maybe, or disbelief masquerading as analysis. One of the senior instructors leaned toward him. "She's reading the wind like she can see it, sir." Briggs said nothing, his jaw flexed once. At 2,500 meters, the range went nearly silent. Even the chatter stopped. Every man there understood what that number meant. 2.5 kilometers, the outer edge of field capability. Beyond that, ballistics became philosophy. Dalton leaned on his rifle, shaking his head. "I've hit 2,100 on a perfect day. Nobody hits 2,500 in this wind." Maya adjusted her scope and didn't answer. She wasn't listening to him anyway. She focused on the flags. They flared, danced, then for a moment aligned. That was her moment. Trigger press, follow through, breath held. 3 full seconds of silence. Then the faintest metallic chime, carried by the wind like a secret. She exhaled slowly, one clean hit, center. Chun lowered his scope. 2.5, first shot confirmed. Rodriguez exhaled through his nose, a slow breath of disbelief. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. Briggs didn't respond. He just watched, the faintest flicker of a smile forming at the corner of his mouth. Not joy, not pride, something heavier. The look of a man who'd just seen the edge of his understanding move a little further away. Word spread before the session ended. By lunch, half the facility knew. By 2 o'clock, they had an audience. Men leaned against railings, pretending to work while sneaking glances at the range. Someone joked about history in the making. Others stayed quiet, waiting for proof. That afternoon, the tests changed. Scenario drills, variable distances, moving targets, timed sequences. The kind of exercises where hesitation killed. Briggs wanted chaos. Chaos revealed character. Dalton went first, 4 out of 6 hits. Respectable. Johnson matched him, the others fell behind. Maya chose to shoot prone, slower, more deliberate. It was a risk, but she valued stability over speed. Chun called the sequence. 2. She swung right, 1,500 meters. Hit. 4. She adjusted left, 1,900. Hit. 6. The furthest target, 2,300 meters. Time was bleeding away. She read the wind once, fired, and the echo answered her. Hit. 3, 5, 1. Each call, each shot, the rhythm held. The last impact came just as the final second ticked off the timer. 6 for 6, Chun said. His voice wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. The crowd behind her murmured, not disbelief this time, but something quieter, more reverent. A kind of shared understanding that they just watched something rare. Maya didn't smile, didn't flinch. She simply cleared her chamber, laid the rifle down, and waited for instructions. Briggs watched her from the platform, this time without the clipboard, without the professional detachment. Just a man watching something rewrite his assumptions. Where the hell did she learn that? One of the instructors whispered. Rodriguez checked her file. Standard sniper school, 2 deployments, no special courses. No competition record. None, sir. Briggs nodded once, eyes never leaving her. Then tomorrow, he said quietly, we'll find out what she really is. The barracks were silent again that night. Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, her data book open across her knees. Each entry was a story: distance, temperature, wind, correction, result. Hundreds of lines across years of training. She filled 7 notebooks since Kandahar. This one was almost full. Her handwriting was neat, almost mathematical. No flourish, no wasted motion. 2,500 m hit first round. Mirage moderate, wind variable, held 2.1 left, confirmed stable hold. She underlined the note once. This wasn't arrogance. It was discipline. Every success was a lesson. Every miss a map of what to fix next time. She thought about Briggs, the sharpness in his tone softening through the day. About Dalton. His silence now weighted with thought instead of contempt. She'd seen this pattern before. Doubt always came first, then curiosity, then respect. But respect wasn't the goal. Accuracy was, control was. She closed the notebook and looked toward the window. The range lights burned faint and distant against the black horizon. Tomorrow the wind would rise. She could feel it already. She whispered softly, more to herself than anyone else. Let them test. I'll show them the difference between practice and belief. The wind arrived early again. By the time she reached the range, flags were snapping against their poles, the air thick with dust. The instructors wore that mix of excitement and unease that came before a storm, literal or otherwise. Briggs stood with Rodriguez on the platform, the wind tearing at their uniforms. This is it, he said quietly. 2,700 meters. Let's see if that focus holds. Maya set her rifle down, adjusted the bipod, and watched the terrain through her scope. She could see the faint white glint of the distant steel target, no bigger than a thumbnail even under high magnification. Dalton watched her from the next station, jaw tight. He wasn't smirking anymore. This is going to be ugly, he muttered to no one in particular. She ignored him, checked her turrets, adjusted her cheek weld. The routine steadied her heartbeat. Wind at her position 8 to 15, shifting west. Mid-range 12, gusting south. Distant due west 16. A complex pattern, unstable. She visualized the path, bullet flight through air that moved like water in currents she could almost see. She took her first breath, slow, deliberate, then exhaled. The shot broke clean. Seconds passed, then a faint, perfect clang. 2,000 meters, first shot hit, Chun confirmed. Briggs lowered his binoculars. Move her to 2,200. She adjusted, waited for the wind to settle into a rhythm, fired again. Hit low center. Rodriguez shook his head, grinning despite himself. She's reading air like it's written text. Let's push it, Briggs said, 2-5. Maya adjusted elevation and windage, nearly 70 inches of drop over that distance. The wind was chaotic now, but there was a pulse beneath it, a rhythm she'd already learned to trust. She waited through 3 gusts. On the 4th calm window, she pressed the trigger. The rifle's recoil nudged her shoulder. The seconds stretched. Then clang. Upper center. Rodriguez's voice was quiet. "That's it, sir. That's mastery." Briggs didn't respond immediately. He just watched her, the stillness, the control, the refusal to gloat. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "we go further." And for the first time in his career, Colonel Harrison Briggs, a man who'd thought he'd seen everything that skill could be, realized he hadn't even come close. That night, as the compound slept, Maya sat on her bunk, staring at the rifle laid across her knees. The wind howled outside, carrying sand across the windows like rain. The weapon gleamed faintly under the dim light. Her hands rested on the barrel like someone touching a living thing. She wasn't thinking about records or glory. She was thinking about stillness, about her father's words on that Colorado hillside. "Don't fight the wind, read it. Let it tell you what it's doing." Tomorrow, she would listen harder than ever before. Because somewhere beyond 2,700 meters, the air itself would decide if she was worthy. And if it did, she'd make it listen. Why were there so many of them today? Maya noticed it the moment she stepped onto the range. The benches that were empty yesterday were crowded now. Uniforms, clipboards, even a few officers she didn't recognize, all gathered along the edge, whispering, pointing toward her station. Word had traveled, too far, too fast. She didn't like it. She built her career on silence, on not being watched, on the quiet satisfaction of doing her job unseen. But now, eyes followed her every move, curious, skeptical, or worse, expectant. Even the air felt heavier. The sky was a blank gray canvas, the kind that promised a hard wind. The flags were already twisting, jerking, snapping with a rhythm that made consistent shooting nearly impossible. Still, she didn't rush. She walked the range like a ritual, boots pressing softly into the sand, head turning slightly as she read the terrain. The distant target, 2,700 meters, shimmered faintly through the morning haze. At that distance, the earth itself curved beneath her line of sight. It was a shot most soldiers never even attempted, a shot that mocked the idea of control. "Crowds bigger than usual," Rodriguez muttered beside her, adjusting his headset. Maya gave a faint smile. "Guess everyone wants to see the storm." He chuckled, but his tone carried something deeper, a hint of pride. Colonel Briggs climbed the platform, eyes sweeping across the range. His expression was unreadable, though his posture had changed since the first day. He no longer carried the cold weight of disbelief, only measured curiosity. "All right, listen up," his voice cut through the wind. "Today's evaluation is optional. No record, no score, just one question: how far can you really go?" A murmur rippled through the shooters. Some stepped forward with confidence, others stayed silent. Dalton raised an eyebrow toward Maya. "Still think luck lasts this long?" She didn't answer, she didn't even look at him. Briggs's gaze flicked between them, then landed on her. "Staff Sergeant Torres, you're up first." The air seemed to still for a heartbeat, then she moved. She laid the rifle down with the calm precision of a ritual she'd performed her entire life. Bipod extended, stock adjusted, cheek weld aligned, breathing slowed. Around her the crowd whispered, snippets of speculation, disbelief, quiet awe. Some were betting she couldn't do it again. Others were hoping she could. Rodriguez crouched beside her, voice low. "Wind's going to mess with you bad between 1,400 and 1,800 meters. Cross currents, maybe up to 20 knots out there." "I know," she murmured. "I can see it." He frowned. "See it?" She nodded toward the far ridges. "Dust lines. Watch how they split. That's where the wind's shifting vertical. It'll pull the bullet left and high if I don't counter early." Rodriguez followed her gaze. He saw nothing, just heat, haze, and dirt. But she spoke with the calm certainty of someone who'd lived her craft long enough to feel it, not think it. He said nothing more. The world narrowed. Through the glass the target swayed faintly, a small steel plate glinting in the pale light. She exhaled once, let the sound of her own breath steady her heartbeat, then pressed the trigger. The recoil broke the stillness. 3 long seconds passed, then a faint, delicate clang. The spotter froze, then raised his radio. 2,700 meters, first shot, confirmed hit. For a moment, even the wind seemed to hesitate. The platform erupted in murmurs, not applause, not disbelief, something quieter, reverence. Briggs's face remained unreadable, but his hand tightened on the railing. Rodriguez smiled faintly, pride tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Damn girl," he whispered. "You just made that distance look like backyard range day." But Maya didn't smile. She simply adjusted her rifle, dialed windage, and fired again. Clang. Second hit. Then a third. And a fourth. Each shot followed a rhythm, the breath, the break, the echo, a pattern that only she seemed to hear. Briggs finally lowered his binoculars, eyes narrowing in something close to wonder. "She's not guessing," he said quietly. "She's listening." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "Sir." He gestured to the range. "That's not instinct, that's comprehension. She's reading the air." By late morning, the impossible had become routine. 3 stations over, Dalton packed his rifle in silence. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by the tight, hollow look of someone staring at their own limits for the first time. When Maya walked past him on her way to reload, he didn't speak, just offered a small nod, the quiet kind that carried more honesty than words ever could. She returned it without pause. Respect earned, not demanded. By noon, Briggs called a halt. The wind had grown feral, strong enough to send dust swirling in blinding waves. Targets vanished behind heat shimmer. Even the instructors had begun shielding their eyes. "Stand down," he ordered. "That's enough for today." But Maya didn't move. She was still studying the wind, her eyes tracking invisible lines across the terrain. Briggs frowned. "You didn't hear me, Sergeant." "I did, sir." Her voice was calm, "but it's not done moving yet." "What is?" "The pattern." He watched her for a moment, then nodded once. "All right, one more, your call." The range fell silent. Even the wind seemed to wait. Maya lay down again, adjusted her elevation, and set her cheek to the stock. Her breathing slowed, heartbeat sinking to the rhythm of the shifting gusts. She could feel it, the air changing direction mid-path, a ripple that would carry the bullet high and left unless she anticipated it early. She aimed off into what looked like empty sky. Rodriguez whispered, "That's too far off, you'll miss by a mile." She didn't answer. The trigger broke clean. A pause, then clang. Perfect hit. The entire line froze. Briggs exhaled slowly, lowering his binoculars. "That's over 3 clicks of drift correction." Rodriguez stared at her. "You just shot through 3 layers of wind." Maya sat up, locking the rifle bolt open. "No, Master Chief." A faint, exhausted smile crossed her lips. "I just stopped fighting it." When the day ended, the crowd dispersed slowly, voices low, subdued. Even the laughter that had once filled the air was gone. What remained was quiet, the kind that came after something undeniable. Briggs stayed on the platform long after the others left, arms folded, eyes on the empty range. Rodriguez joined him, silent for a moment before speaking. "You saw it too, sir. That wasn't luck." Briggs nodded. "Luck doesn't repeat." "So what do you think?" He looked out toward the horizon, where the steel targets gleamed faintly in the dying light. "I think I just met someone who doesn't measure distance in meters. She measures it in belief." Rodriguez smiled. "You sound almost poetic, sir." Briggs huffed softly. "Don't tell anyone." That night the barracks were alive with whispers. "Did you see it?" 3,000 meters, clean hit. She reads wind like it's a damn language. She made the colonel stop talking. Maya heard every word but didn't react. She sat alone in the corner of the mess hall, her food untouched, her notebook open beside her. On the page, 2700 m first round, mirage dense, gusts unpredictable, shot during fourth lull cycle, correction plus 18 mils. She wrote it without pride, only precision. Every detail mattered, every pattern could teach. Rodriguez approached, sliding into the seat across from her. You know they're going to talk about this for a long time. She closed the notebook. Let them. You don't care. I care about consistency. She paused, not applause. He smiled faintly. You remind me of someone I used to know, quiet, smart, never raised his voice unless it mattered. Colonel Briggs. Rodriguez chuckled. You catch on fast. Maya looked down at her hands, calloused, steady, scarred. Men like him don't trust easily. He's earned that. And you? I learned that respect isn't something you ask for. It's something you stop needing. Her tone was soft, almost reflective. For the first time, Rodriguez saw what drove her, not glory, not rebellion, but something quieter, a hunger for mastery, for peace in precision. The next morning, the storm rolled in. Not a metaphorical one, a real, merciless coastal storm that turned the air into a wall of sand and wind. The range was shut down, equipment covered, personnel confined to barracks. Maya stood by the window, watching the storm tear across the training field. The sound was like distant gunfire, steady, rhythmic, endless. Briggs entered quietly, hands clasped behind his back. They grounded all exercises, he said, visibility down to 30 feet. She nodded, understood, sir. He studied her for a moment. You ever think about teaching? She blinked, teaching, sir. Sniper school, instruction. You've got something the others don't. You see patterns before they appear. She hesitated. I don't know if I'm meant to teach. Briggs smiled faintly. Maybe not, but sometimes leadership doesn't come from speaking. It comes from showing people what's possible. His words hung in the air, carried by the howling wind outside. She looked back toward the window, the storm swallowing the rain she'd conquered, and said quietly, sometimes the silence teaches more than words ever could. Briggs nodded once, keep that. Then he left her standing there, a lone figure framed against the storm, her reflection fading into the glass. That night, as the wind screamed outside, Maya wrote one final line in her notebook before turning out the light. The wind is never the enemy, only the impatient are. She closed it gently, laid her rifle beside her bed, and whispered into the darkness, words meant for no one but carried somewhere beyond the walls nonetheless. They're not watching a soldier anymore, they're watching a lesson. And somewhere deep inside the compound, a hardened SEAL colonel realized she was right. Why was the colonel watching her so closely now? The storm had passed overnight, leaving the world stripped and new. The air was cold, the sky washed clean, the range glistening with dew and silence. Yet something had shifted. When Maya Torres stepped outside the barracks that morning, she could feel it in the way the men looked at her. Not mockery anymore, not even skepticism. It was something heavier, curiosity wrapped in respect. They didn't speak to her much, but they stepped aside when she walked by. Doors opened before she reached them. Conversations paused when she passed. Colonel Briggs was standing on the far edge of the compound, his hands folded behind his back, his gaze on the mountains. "Morning, Staff Sergeant," he said without turning. "Morning, sir." "Sleep, enough?" He nodded slowly, still looking at the horizon. "Good, you'll need it." She waited. He didn't look at her, didn't raise his voice. He just kept watching the line where the sun touched the ridges. "You ever run a live sim, Torres?" "Once, sir, Mountain Recon, Kandahar region, small team." "This one's different." He turned then, calm eyes, steady voice. We're testing command cohesion, real terrain, real comms. Half my unit will be playing enemy force. You'll be attached to Alpha Squad as Overwatch." Her breath caught. "Permission to clarify, sir. You're integrating me with SEAL Alpha." "You earned it." A long silence passed between them. Only the faint rustle of morning wind moved. She nodded once. "Understood, sir." He studied her face, then added, "Don't prove anything, just be what you are." Then he walked away, leaving her with the echo of words she hadn't expected: respect, wrapped in responsibility. Briefing room, 600 hours. Maps, terrain schematics, mission diagrams. The walls were alive with information. Alpha Squad gathered around the table, their voices low, precise, professional. Dalton was there too. His tone was different now, quieter, humbler. "Torres, you'll be our eye in the hills," he said, adjusting the holographic map. "Command post is 4 clicks east of objective. You'll have radio link with me and Colonel Briggs. No one else. Clear." "Clear." Rodriguez added from the corner, "Rules are simple. Real movement, live rounds in safety configuration. No one fires unless authorized. Objective is recon and extraction simulation. Think of it as a dress rehearsal for chaos." Dalton smirked slightly, but it wasn't mockery this time. "Welcome to the family, Sergeant." She gave a nod, small, controlled. "Glad to be useful." Briggs entered then, the room quieting instinctively. He scanned their faces once before speaking. "Listen up, this isn't about shooting, it's about decisions under pressure. You'll be outnumbered, outflanked, and out of time. Your job is to stay functional. Torres will handle Overwatch. If she calls a warning, you listen. Understood?" A chorus of yes, sir followed. His gaze flicked to Maya. "You ready?" She met his eyes. "Always, sir." They moved out before sunrise. Maya's boots pressed into damp earth, the scent of pine and rain heavy in the air. The simulation field stretched for miles, mountains, ravines, abandoned structures. The kind of terrain that tested every sense. She hiked to the ridge, her pack heavy with gear, rifle strapped across her shoulder. The others disappeared into the valley below, their comms crackling faintly in her ear. At 700 she reached her position, an outcropping of rock overlooking the valley. From here she could see everything. The winding path, the shadowed gullies, the faint glint of the river where the fake enemy would cross. She set up the tripod, locked her scope, checked elevation. Every adjustment was exact, every motion practiced. Then silence. She waited, listened. The wind brushed across her cheek like a whisper. "Alpha, this is Overwatch," she murmured into the mic. "You're clear for movement." "Copy that," Dalton replied. His tone was steady, respectful now. The operation unfolded with mechanical precision. Alpha moved through the forest in staggered formation, shadows gliding between the trees. Through her scope, Maya tracked every step. Left flank secure. Thermal sweep clear. Movement in grid Bravo 2, possible contact. She relayed calmly, voice low, efficient. For nearly an hour, everything went by the book. Then the wind changed. It came hard from the west, snapping the branches and blurring visibility with a wall of dust. Through her scope, she caught a flicker movement near a ridge they'd just cleared. "Alpha, hold position," she whispered. "Copy Overwatch, what do you see?" "Something off-grid, East Ridge, 70 meters above your current course." "Confirmed contact." "Not yet, but it's not ours." Dalton hesitated. Could be part of the sim team. She adjusted focus. The figure moved wrong, low, careful, weapon slung tight, deliberate in every motion, not the posture of a training actor. Her pulse quickened. "Negative, that's not simulation movement." Briggs's voice crackled suddenly through the channel. "Torres, confirm visual." She steadied her breathing. The target lifted its rifle, muzzle flash glinting under the sun. "Contact confirmed." Before command could reply, the valley erupted with gunfire. It wasn't simulation rounds. The difference was instant, sharp, violent, unmistakable, real muzzle crack, real metal slicing air. Dalton's voice broke through the chaos. "We're under fire, live rounds, who the hell?" "Alpha fall back North Ridge," Briggs barked. Maya was already moving, her rifle steady, eyes sweeping for muzzle flash. 1, 2, 3 figures, no insignia, no comms gear. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. Exhale. Press. 3 shots, 3 drops. Overwatch neutralized hostiles. Sector Delta clear for movement, she reported, voice steady despite her pounding heart. Briggs's reply came through static. Torres, maintain position. We're rerouting backup. Identify how they breached perimeter. Copy, sir. She reloaded, eyes scanning the hills. The enemy had come from the South Ridge, blind spot between security grids. Smart, experienced. Her radio cracked again. "Overwatch, this is Alpha, we've got one wounded. Extraction route compromised." "Hold position," she said quietly. "I'm coming down." "Negative," Dalton barked. "You're Overwatch." But she was already moving, rifle slung, boots cutting through dust and stone, wind howling around her. There was no time for rules, not anymore. The forest closed around her like a fist. Branches tore at her sleeves. The smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air. She moved low, fast, silent instincts born from years in hostile terrain taking over. Ahead, faint bursts of gunfire echoed. "Alpha, this is Torres," she whispered. "Talk to me." Dalton's voice came, clipped, breathless. "One man hit. Left leg. We're pinned behind a ridge, 3 tangos closing in from the north. Mark your smoke." A faint red plume bloomed ahead. She dropped prone, leveled the rifle and scanned. Movement, 3 shadows cutting through brush, their approach tight, tactical. Not random fighters, professionals. She adjusted windage, steadied her breath and fired. First target hit. Second hit. Third vanished behind a boulder. She waited, nothing. Then a flicker, a reflection from a scope edge. She exhaled softly, shifted 1/2 mil and pressed the trigger. Impact, silence. Dalton's voice returned, low with awe. "All targets down." "Copy, move to extraction route. I'll cover from here." He didn't argue this time. Through the haze, she watched them lift their wounded and move steady, disciplined, trusting her eyes completely. She followed them through her scope, shot by shot, until the last man disappeared into the dust toward safety. When the dust settled, the silence returned. The only sound was her own breathing. Then the faint crunch of boots on gravel. Briggs emerged through the brush, headset around his neck, eyes scanning the carnage. He stopped beside her, gaze falling on the 3 fallen bodies. No insignia, no ID, foreign equipment. "Not ours," he said quietly. "No, sir." He looked at her then, really looked, the calm stillness in her face, the absence of fear. "You broke protocol." "Yes, sir." "You saved 4 lives." She didn't respond. Briggs exhaled slowly, his tone softening. "I don't know who they were or how they got through, but you saw it before anyone else did." She finally looked at him, eyes steady. "You told me to be what I am, sir." He held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "And what exactly is that, Torres?" Her reply was quiet, almost a whisper, a listener. Later, back at the compound, the medics worked in silence. The wounded SEAL was stable. The others sat outside the infirmary, their faces streaked with dirt and disbelief. No one spoke for a while. Then Dalton looked up. "I saw it through my scope. She was moving before any of us even knew they were there." Rodriguez nodded. She read the air again. Briggs leaned against the wall, arms folded. No, she read intent. The room fell quiet. Maya sat apart from them, cleaning her rifle with slow, deliberate movements. Her hand shook only once when she reached the trigger assembly. She paused, breathed, steadied herself. Outside, the wind had shifted again, softer this time, carrying the smell of rain. Briggs watched her for a long time. Then he said quietly but firmly, "Torres, you're not Overwatch anymore. You're lead." She looked up startled. "Sir." "You earned it. From here on, when I say eyes on, I mean yours." Her throat tight. She didn't smile, didn't thank him, just nodded once. "Yes, sir." Briggs turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "You know what the seals say, right?" She shook her head. "The only easy day was yesterday." He paused, eyes soft with something close to pride. "I think you just changed what that means." That night she sat outside, watching the wind play across the training field. The stars were sharp, the air still. She thought about the ridge, the sound of the shots, the stillness between danger and action. In that silence, she realized something she hadn't before. She wasn't proving herself anymore. She was becoming herself. And sometimes, that's harder than any war. She looked up at the stars and whispered softly to the empty night. Sometimes the quiet ones aren't waiting to speak, they're waiting to act. Why were they treating her like a suspect? The debrief room was colder than usual, a narrow space of concrete walls, humming lights, and the faint metallic scent of gun oil that never truly faded. Maya sat at the far end of the long table, her posture straight, hands still, face expressionless. The others had left hours ago. She was the last one they called back. The door opened, and Colonel Briggs entered, trailed by two officers from internal operations, men in gray suits who didn't belong in a field compound. They carried tablets, not rifles. "Staff Sergeant Torres," the first said without looking up, "please confirm your full statement of events." She nodded once. "Yes, sir. Visual contact confirmed at approximately 8:13. 3 hostiles, unmarked gear, unsanctioned fire, engaged under self-defense authority." The man scrolled through a document, his tone detached. "And you acted without explicit command authorization." "Yes, sir." "Despite standing orders to maintain Overwatch only." She met his gaze. "Yes, sir." The second officer leaned forward. "And why, exactly, did you believe you had that discretion?" Silence filled the room. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead. Maya's voice, when it came, was steady. "Because I saw the muzzle flash. I didn't wait to ask permission to confirm reality." The words hung there, unshaken, unapologetic. Briggs stood near the window, arms folded, saying nothing. He watched the exchange, jaw tight. The first officer scribbled a note. "You disobeyed direct orders. You broke simulation protocol. You engaged in a live-fire environment without command clearance." "And saved 4 men," Briggs said suddenly, his voice sharp enough to cut the air. The officers turned toward him. "Colonel, we're not disputing her skill." "Yes, you are," Briggs interrupted. "You're turning instinct into misconduct. You weren't there." The room tensed. Maya stayed silent. She didn't need to defend herself. The truth sat heavy in the colonel's voice. The officers exchanged glances, then closed their tablets. "Command will review the case. Until then, Staff Sergeant Torres is to remain on limited duty. No live range activity." They left without another word, the door shut. For a moment, neither Briggs nor Maya spoke. The air hummed with quiet frustration. Finally, she said softly, "I understand, sir." He turned toward her. "You shouldn't have to." "I acted outside protocol." "You acted like a soldier." She looked down at her hands, the same steady hands that had never missed a shot, and said quietly, "Sometimes that's not enough." He stared at her, the lines around his eyes deep with something like regret. "You remind me of someone I used to know." Another sniper. A commander, Afghanistan. He didn't wait for orders either. "What happened to him?" Briggs's gaze drifted toward the window. "He saved his men, lost his career. She nodded slowly, understanding more than she wanted to. He exhaled through his nose. They'll call you reckless. They always do when they don't understand control without permission. Maya stood. I didn't pull the trigger to prove anything, sir. I know, he said softly. That's what scares them. The next few days moved in slow motion. No range time, no drills, just waiting. The kind of stillness that pressed against the chest until breathing felt wrong. Maya spent the hours cleaning her rifle, logging data, rereading field notes she didn't need to. The wind outside shifted with each hour, warm, cold, calm, angry, a constant reminder that the world never stayed still. Dalton stopped by on the third night. He stood awkwardly at her door, one hand gripping the frame. Heard about the suspension. She nodded. Seems word travels faster than wind. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. You know, I used to think the only way to earn respect here was through noise. You proved me wrong. Maya gave a small shrug. Noise fades, results don't. Dalton looked down. You ever get tired of being right quietly? She tilted her head, a faint smile flickering for the first time in days. No, you. He laughed softly. Every damn day. Then he straightened, his tone shifting. There's talk going around. Command calling it an intelligence breach. Nobody knows who those men were. Her eyes sharpened. Not part of our training force. He shook his head. Negative, no insignia, foreign gear. They came in through a blind spot on the south perimeter, a place that shouldn't exist. She leaned forward slightly. Should. Security logs show the gate sensors were offline for exactly 12 minutes, right before contact. Her pulse tightened. That's not coincidence. Dalton nodded grimly. Briggs thinks the same, but he's walking a line. Command wants it buried as a simulation misfire. Maya stared at the floor for a long time. You think they'll bury it? Dalton's silence was her answer. That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the barracks lights dimmed, watching the moon cut through low clouds. Her reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, eyes darker, jaw set. Her father's voice echoed again in memory. Don't fight what you can't change, but never ignore what you understand. She whispered to herself, I understand enough. By morning, she was on the move. The security room was empty at dawn. She moved quietly, her boots silent on the tile. The main console glowed faint blue in the half-light, scrolling time stamps and encrypted logs. She plugged in her data chip, a standard analysis module, nothing fancy, and began sorting through the recordings. 0812 video static. 0813 breach detection disabled. 0814 system reboot initiated remotely. Her fingers froze remotely. Someone inside the network had shut down the security grid from a control hub. She accessed the login signature, masked, but not erased. Whoever did it had been careful, not careful enough. Buried deep in the metadata was a timestamp linked to Command Office C7. Her heartbeat quickened. That was an admin wing, not tactical command. She downloaded everything and killed the monitor before anyone noticed. Later that day, Briggs called her to his office. He looked tired, the kind of tired that came from fighting politics, not war. Command's review is ongoing, he said. They're leaning toward exoneration. But not officially. He met her gaze. You've been digging, haven't you? She didn't answer. He exhaled, a faint, bitter smile pulling at his lips. You remind me of myself 20 years ago. I found the breach origin, she said quietly. Command Office C7. Someone authorized remote override. Briggs's eyes hardened. You're sure? She handed him the data chip. I didn't guess, sir. He studied it for a long time, then pocketed it. This doesn't leave the room, not yet. Why? Because if you're right, that means someone inside wanted that ambush to happen. Maya felt her stomach tighten. Why would anyone? Politics, Briggs interrupted. Testing readiness, manipulating outcomes, sending messages between divisions. Happens more often than you think. Her jaw clenched. People almost died. I know. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of helpless fury. Briggs leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. You can't chase this. Not yet. Let me handle it. I'm not good at waiting, sir. He smiled faintly. I've noticed. The next day, command arrived unannounced. A black convoy rolled into the compound, dust swirling behind it. Officers stepped out, crisp uniforms, mirrored sunglasses, cold authority. One of them, General Haverson, was a man Briggs clearly knew. Their handshake was short, forced. Maya watched from a distance, every instinct alert. When they entered the command building, the air around the base seemed to change. Tighter, quieter. An hour later, Briggs called her in. The general was there, his expression unreadable. Staff Sergeant Torres, your actions saved American lives. That's commendable. Thank you, sir. He paused. But your access to classified systems violated chain of command. Effective immediately, you're reassigned to administrative rotation until further notice. She froze, sir, with respect. That's not a discussion. Briggs's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. His silence was its own rebellion. Haverson continued, consider it a temporary measure. You'll receive further orders next week. He stood, offered a tight smile, and left. The door shut behind him with a weight that felt permanent. For a long moment, neither she nor Briggs moved. Finally, she said softly, You told me to be what I am, sir. I did. And now it's punishment. Briggs looked at her, a quiet, steady gaze. No, now it's proof. Of what? That silence is power, but truth is louder. She stared at him, confusion mixing with anger and respect. He leaned forward. They want quiet compliance. You don't give them that, you give them accuracy. That scares people. He stood, his voice low. Let them sideline you. Let them underestimate you. Just stay ready. For what? His reply came after a pause, barely above a whisper. For when the truth doesn't stay buried. That night she sat at her bunk, staring at her rifle. It wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was memory, precision, control, understanding. She thought about the men who'd attacked them, about the breach, about the general's smile that didn't reach his eyes. Her hands tightened around the rifle case. This wasn't over. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she wanted answers. Outside, the wind had changed again, steady, whispering, patient. She looked out at the moonlit field and whispered to the quiet air. You can bury a report, but you can't bury wind. And somewhere in the command office where secrets lived, a file marked Torres, observation ongoing, blinked quietly on a secure terminal. The game had shifted, and the silent sniper wasn't done watching. Why was someone like her sent to a desk? 3 weeks had passed since the hearing, 21 long days of silence, reports, and meaningless routine. The clatter of keyboards replaced the echo of rifle bolts. The hum of air conditioning replaced the wind. Staff Sergeant Maya Torres now sat behind a steel desk in a small, windowless office deep in the administrative wing of Naval Special Warfare Command. The nameplate outside her door read, Data Liaison, Logistics Coordination. It could have said exile. It would have meant the same thing. Every morning she logged into the network, entered serial numbers for supplies, reviewed equipment requisitions, and stared at lines of text until her eyes blurred. No rifle, no range, no mission. She'd gone from reading the air, the invisible currents of chaos and distance, to reading spreadsheets. The silence hurt in a new way now, not because it was quiet, but because it was empty. She didn't complain, not once. She just did the job, answered when spoken to, and left on time. The officers above her seemed relieved the problem soldier had gone still. They didn't know that silence could mean focus. Colonel Briggs checked on her every few days, though officially he wasn't supposed to. He'd stop by under the guise of routine inspection, standing in the doorway while she worked. "How are the spreadsheets treating you?" he'd ask. She'd glance up deadpan. "They don't move much, sir. Easier to aim at." He'd smirk faintly. "You holding up? Still breathing?" He nodded. "Good, stay patient." She wanted to ask for what, but didn't. Something in his tone told her he couldn't say more. Then, on the 22nd day, everything changed. It started with a simple message. Her inbox pinged, sender unidentified. Subject Southridge footage unredacted. No body text, no signature, just an attached file. Her heartbeat slowed. She glanced toward the hallway, empty, then opened it. The screen flickered. Grainy footage appeared, security camera feed from the day of the ambush. At first it looked familiar, the ridges, the path, the wind. But then she saw it. 2 minutes before the first shot, a figure entering the camera's frame, not one of the attackers, someone wearing a U.S. command jacket. He walked to the junction box, the same one that controlled the perimeter sensors, and keyed in a code. The grid lights blinked red, then dark. She leaned closer. The video froze on a face, clear, unhurried, calm. General Halvorsen. Her breath caught. It wasn't possible. It wasn't allowed to be possible. She replayed it twice, 3 times. Each frame screamed the same truth. He hadn't just known about the breach, he'd created it. She sat back in her chair, her pulse hammering in her throat. The silence of the office suddenly felt like pressure, like the air itself was watching her. Then a soft ping, another message. "If you're smart, you'll stop looking." No sender, no signature, no trace. She stared at it for a long time, then quietly unplugged the computer and slipped the drive into her pocket. Briggs found her waiting in his office before sunrise. He was still in running gear, sweat clinging to his shirt, breath fogging in the cold air. "This better be good," he muttered, grabbing a towel. "Sir," she said quietly, placing the data chip on his desk, "you told me to stay ready." He froze mid-motion. The tone in her voice, cold, certain, stopped him. "What is it?" "Proof." She told him everything, the footage, the message, the threat. Briggs didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then he sat down slowly, the weight of command sinking onto his shoulders like lead. "You're sure about the ID?" "Yes, sir." He rubbed a hand over his face. "Halvorsen's untouchable. He has connections deep in Joint Command, even intelligence circles. If what you found is real." "It's real." He exhaled slowly. "Then this is no longer a training scandal. It's treason." She met his gaze. "What do we do?" Briggs looked out the window, dawn light spilling across the base. "We do what we always do, Torres." "Which is?" "We watch and we learn." For the next week, they worked in silence. Not official work, shadow work. Briggs used his rank to pull back-channel reports, archived comms, transport logs. Maya handled the analysis, piecing together movement patterns and access records. By the 4th night, the puzzle was complete. 3 shipments of training munitions had been rerouted to an undisclosed facility on the coast, a location marked as Joint Readiness Zone 19. Except Zone 19 didn't exist on any official map. "Hidden facility," Maya murmured, "probably outside oversight." Briggs nodded. "That's where your attackers came from." She looked at him sharply. "You're sure?" He tapped the file. Their weapons matched the inventory listed in those phantom shipments. He used his authority to test live protocols under the guise of readiness drills. He wanted data, human data. Real response times, real fear, real reaction under live conditions. She felt the anger rise, quiet but searing. "He used us." He used you, Briggs corrected softly. You were the variable he couldn't control. Her jaw tightened. What now? He looked her in the eyes. Now we finish it. That night, they moved under cover of silence. No authorization, no team, just the colonel and the sniper, a ghost operation between the lines of legality. Maya wore civilian fatigues, her rifle hidden in a weatherproof case. Briggs carried only a sidearm and a data drive. They drove 2 hours down the coast, the black SUV blending with the night. The sea wind howled through the open windows as the facility lights appeared in the distance, a cluster of hangars half buried in mist. No insignia, no guards visible, but she could feel the watchfulness in the dark, the kind that came from cameras, not men. Briggs parked behind a dune. You sure about this? Maya chambered around quietly. If I'm wrong, we drive away. He smiled faintly. And if you're right? She looked through the scope toward the perimeter fence. Then we're not driving anywhere. They moved fast, low, silent. The rhythm of coordinated movement, an unspoken trust forged by shared defiance. Briggs handled the access codes. Maya scanned for movement. Inside the first hangar, the air smelled of oil and cold metal. Rows of crates lined the floor, stamped with serials matching the ones from her logs. She knelt, pried one open. Live ammunition, suppressed rifles, no simulation rounds. Sir, she whispered, these are active combat loads. Briggs checked another. And look, foreign manufacture, imported under U.S. signature, Jesus Christ. He lifted a folder from one of the crates, stamped with red ink, Project Mercury. Inside photographs, her range, her team, her face. Maya stared at them, her pulse quickening. They've been tracking us. Briggs flipped the next page. Not tracking, measuring. The documents listed biometric data, firing latency, stress metrics. At the top of the chart, Torres M. Maya whispered. They used the ambush as a live psychological test. Briggs clenched the folder shut. He's building a predictive model, turning soldiers into test subjects. A noise outside cut him off. Footsteps. Maya froze, hands sliding to her rifle. 2 guards approached, their flashlights sweeping the doorway. Foreign accents murmured softly, not Navy, not domestic. Briggs gestured toward a side corridor. Move. They slipped through the shadows, silent as breath. But one of the guards turned suddenly, catching a faint glint from Maya's scope. Hey! Light flooded the corridor. Run, Briggs barked. They sprinted through the maze of hallways, the sound of boots behind them. Bullets tore through sheet metal, sparks flying. Maya swung around a corner, dropped to one knee and fired. The rifle barked once, the nearest pursuer fell. Left tunnel, she shouted. They burst through an emergency door and into open air. Ahead, the coastline, silver under moonlight. Behind, engines roaring to life. Briggs pressed a small drive into her hand. Get this out. What about you? I'll slow them down. She shook her head. Not happening. He gave a faint smile. That's an order, Sergeant. She stared at him, seeing in his eyes what he wasn't saying. You can't win alone, sir. I don't need to win, he said softly. I just need to give you time. He turned before she could argue, disappearing into the smoke and chaos. Maya hesitated, only a heartbeat. Then she ran down the dunes, across the rocks, toward the sound of the sea. Gunfire echoed behind her. A single explosion split the night. She didn't look back, she couldn't. She reached the shoreline, breath ragged, sand sticking to her boots. The drive was still clutched tight in her hand. The sound of the waves drowned the world. She stared out at the horizon, cold, endless, vast, and whispered into the wind. Watch and learn. By dawn, the facility was gone, burned to ash, scrubbed from records before investigators even arrived. Official report, training accident, fuel line detonation, no survivors. But she knew better. Because the drive still existed, hidden, protected, waiting. And so did she. She found a small safe house inland, the kind used by operatives who'd learned to live between the lines of truth and silence. Every night, she replayed Briggs's final words in her mind. Stay ready. She didn't know if he'd survived. The explosion left nothing certain. But his voice, steady, calm, defiant, lived on in the silence she carried. And now that silence had purpose. The kind that moved mountains when it finally spoke. How do you move through a world that wants you forgotten? For Maya Torres, the days after the explosion blurred into weeks of deliberate invisibility. New haircut, civilian jacket, no rank, no badge. She drifted from coast to desert like a ghost who still remembered how to breathe. Each dawn she woke to the same ritual, clean the rifle, study the drive, listen to the wind. The silence that once centered her had become the only thing that kept her sane. Briggs's voice haunted the quiet. Stay ready. 2 words that'd weight now, heavier than any order she'd ever taken. She kept moving because motion meant life. Somewhere in the wreckage of Project Mercury was proof that he hadn't died in vain. Somewhere in the encrypted files she carried was the truth that still pulsed like a heartbeat inside the machine. And somewhere, maybe, Briggs was still out there. The safe house in Nevada was nothing more than an old survey shack built into a cliffside. She'd chosen it for its silence, the kind that even satellites couldn't hear. Dust covered everything, and the air smelled of stone and gun oil. The drive sat in front of her laptop, small, black, unremarkable. She spent every night trying to break its encryption, until she finally did by accident or maybe instinct. A single folder blinked open, Mercury/continuation protocol. Inside, field logs, biometric data, shipment manifests. The last entry was dated 4 days after the explosion. Her pulse froze. Subject B, status alive, contained. She scrolled down. A location code, Sector 41/Boreas facility. Briggs. Alive. For a moment she couldn't breathe. Then she was moving, packing, checking ammo, calibrating scope. The calm she'd trained into herself returned like muscle memory. Grief became focus. If he was alive, they'd need him silent, which meant she'd need to make noise. She reached the outskirts of Boreas 3 nights later. The facility sat carved into a canyon, cold concrete and steel half-hidden beneath sand. Minimal guards, no markings, all power rooted underground. Whoever ran it didn't want attention. Maya lay prone on a ridge 2 kilometers out, scope glinting faintly under the stars. Through thermal, she counted 6 sentries, 2 patrol drones, and a comms tower pulsing every 40 seconds. Patterns, always patterns. She waded through 3 rotations before she saw it, the weak point, a blind arc where the drones overlapped, 28 seconds of invisibility. That was her window. She moved like breath through the dark, down the ridge over the wire beneath the camera's sweep. No wasted motion, no sound. At the entrance tunnel, a keypad blinked red. She tried the oldest trick in the book, listen. Each button click carried tone variations. Each variation was pressure. After 10 seconds, she pressed 6 digits in sequence. The door hissed open. Inside, the air was colder, metallic. She moved deeper past storage bays and locked labs. Every sound amplified, the echo of her boots, the whisper of ventilation. Then she heard it, voices, 2 men, English clipped military. Transfers tomorrow. Command wants the subject moved before external review. You ask me, they should have left him dead. Maya froze behind a pillar. Subject him, her chest tightened. She waited for them to pass, then slipped through the open door they'd left behind. The room beyond was small, dim, lined with medical equipment. And there, chained to a cot, IVs snaking from his arm, was Colonel Harrison Briggs. Alive. Barely. She crossed the space in silence, her hand trembling as she reached to his wrist. A pulse, weak, steady. "Sir," she whispered, "it's me." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, then sharpened. When he saw her, something like disbelief softened into the faintest smile. "Took you long enough, Torres." She almost laughed, but it caught in her throat. "You're supposed to be dead." "So they keep telling me." She cut the restraints with her knife. He winced as circulation returned. "How bad?" she asked. "Couple cracked ribs, one hell of a concussion. Pride's intact, though." Even half broken, his humor still had steel. She slipped his arm over her shoulder, guiding him to his feet. "We don't have long," she murmured. "Extraction route's dirty but clear." He gave a nod, but his gaze caught something on the counter, a row of data chips labeled Mercury Phase II. He frowned. "They're expanding it." She followed his eyes. Each label listed new names: soldiers, pilots, civilians. Her stomach turned. "They're turning it into a program." He reached for the nearest chip, but footsteps echoed from the hall. Maya pressed him toward the door. "Later, we move now." They slipped into the service corridor just as two guards entered the lab behind them. Shouts followed. Alarms blared. Red lights spilled through the hallway. Briggs grunted, pain flaring with every step. "You have a plan, right?" "Of course," she said dryly. "Survive." They ran. Gunfire followed, sharp and disciplined. She pushed him ahead, returning controlled bursts that echoed down the metal walls. One guard dropped, the others scattered. "Left tunnel," she shouted. They burst into a loading bay, the exit blocked by armored doors. A keypad blinked green. Briggs leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "Can you open it?" "I can try." She keyed the panel. No response, locked behind external command. Then Briggs reached into his jacket, pulling a small transmitter. Old habit. Never trust an exit you didn't build. He pressed the trigger. The charge detonated on the other side, a blast that shook the ground. The doors buckled outward. Light air freedom. They stumbled into the open canyon as the facility behind them roared with alarms. Drones lifted from their pads, lights sweeping the darkness. Maya dropped to one knee, steadied her rifle. One shot. The lead drone exploded midair, the others veered off course in confusion. "Still got it," Briggs muttered. "Always will," she said, helping him up. They reached the outer ridge just as sirens faded into distance. The facility burned quietly below. Another secret turned to smoke. For a moment they just stood there, the wind whipping through the silence between them. "You shouldn't have come," he said finally. She looked at him. "You told me to stay ready." He smiled faintly. "Guess I should choose my words more carefully." "You'd have done the same." He didn't argue. They made camp in the hills that night, under a sky so full of stars it felt almost cruel. Briggs sat against a boulder, wrapped in a blanket, the faint glow of the fire dancing in his eyes. Maya cleaned her rifle by habit, though it didn't need it. The repetition kept her steady. After a while he spoke. "You saw the names on those files." "I did." "They'll erase us both for this." She looked up, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "Then we make it impossible." He tilted his head. "You have a plan." "I have evidence, enough to light a fire that won't go out." She tapped her pack. "The drive backed up, 3 copies. If anything happens to me, it still surfaces." He smiled. "You always were a step ahead." She shrugged. "Comes from being underestimated." He studied her for a moment, then said softly, "You remind me of why I joined. It wasn't medals or rank. It was people like you." The words hit her harder than she expected. She looked away, pretending to adjust her rifle. "I'm just doing my job." "No," he said, "you're doing what's right." Silence stretched between them, thick and human, the kind that holds truth without needing to explain it. Finally she asked, "What happens now?" Briggs stared into the fire. Now we show them what happens when silence learns to speak. At dawn, they moved again. Briggs was slower but steady. Maya carried most of the gear, her eyes scanning the horizon for patrols. The nearest town was 20 miles north, a safe house run by an old contact of Briggs. They walked in silence until the sun rose high, baking the sand into white heat. Then, from the valley behind them, came the distant thrum of helicopters. Maya turned, 3 black shapes against the sky moving fast. They found us. Briggs grimaced. They always do. She pulled him toward a ravine. Down now. They slid behind the rocks as the helicopters swept overhead. Dust filled the air. One broke formation, circling lower. Infrared, Briggs muttered. They'll see us in seconds. Maya pulled a thermal blanket from her pack, throwing it over them. Then we make seconds count. She leveled her rifle through a narrow gap, heart calm, breathing even. The world slowed. The hum of rotors became rhythm. Distance became calculation. Wind 4 ms south. Drop 2.1 mils. She exhaled and pressed the trigger. The shot split the morning like thunder. The round hit the rotor housing. The helicopter bucked sideways, spinning, dropping out of sight behind the ridge. The other 2 peeled away instantly, retreating like animals that had just recognized the predator. Briggs stared at her, half amused, half in awe. You do realize that shot was over 2,000 meters uphill against wind. She reloaded calmly. Yeah, I read it. Then, for the first time since the ambush weeks ago, she smiled. They reached the safe house that evening, a crumbling farmhouse hidden among canyon brush, long abandoned. Inside, dust motes drifted through slanted light. Briggs collapsed onto a chair, exhaustion catching up. Maya set the pack on the table and powered the laptop. The screen glowed pale blue. The drive connected, files spreading open like a confession. Every name, every order, every falsified report. Project Mercury laid bare. She uploaded the first batch to an encrypted cloud, fingers flying over keys. Briggs watched her, quiet pride behind weary eyes. You realize what happens when this goes public. She nodded. They'll come for us. And you're not afraid. She paused, then looked at him. Fear's just a wind, sir. You can't stop it, you just read it. He smiled faintly, closing his eyes. Good answer. She watched him drift into exhausted sleep, then turned back to the screen. The upload bar crept slowly upward, 62%, 73%, 100%. Outside, the desert wind howled like applause. The truth was out there now, traveling faster than command could contain it. Names, faces, coordinates, a digital storm with no off switch. Maya leaned back, the faintest tremor of emotion breaking through her calm. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to whisper it out loud, words soft as prayer, steady as conviction. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And the silence, at last, began to sound like victory. Why was the world suddenly listening? For the first time in her life, Maya Torres felt the noise of truth spreading faster than any bullet she'd ever fired. The files had gone live at 03:47 hours, first a leak on an encrypted forum, then a military whistleblower feed, then a dozen major networks before dawn. By sunrise, Project Mercury was everywhere. Screens across bases and offices lit up with the same words: unauthorized human testing, covert operations, internal compromise. Names, faces, signatures, all of it laid bare. No deniability, no control. The silence that once protected power now worked against it, because silence, once broken, echoed. Maya sat by the farmhouse window, rifle across her knees, watching the dust trail of incoming vehicles on the horizon. It didn't surprise her. It was only a matter of time. Briggs stirred in the next room, his injuries mending slowly but his mind as sharp as ever. He emerged, coffee in hand, wrapped in a weathered jacket. "They're coming," she said simply. He nodded, figured. "You regret it." He gave a tired smile. Regret for people who still think they had another choice. She studied him, the man who'd taught her that silence could command respect, that calm wasn't weakness, and that leadership wasn't about volume. Now, standing in the last quiet place they had, she understood something he'd known all along. You can't control how the truth lands. You can only aim it well. An hour later, the first helicopters appeared over the ridge. Government issue, unmarked, no insignia. She counted 3. "Extraction or arrest?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Briggs sipped his coffee. "Depends who's in charge now." They didn't run. There was nowhere to run, not anymore. She glanced at the laptop on the table. The files were already gone, duplicated, mirrored, shared. Even if they destroyed every copy here, the storm was already loose. The screen still glowed faint blue, a final line of code flashing like a heartbeat. "Transmission complete." She closed it gently. "Whatever happens next," she said softly, "it's out of our hands." Briggs looked at her. "That's what you think." She frowned. "Sir." He set the cup down, eyes steady. "The difference between people who survive and people who live, Torres, is understanding that it's never really out of your hands. You always have one last shot, even if it's not from a rifle." Before she could answer, a voice boomed through a loudspeaker outside. "Colonel Harrison, Briggs. Staff Sergeant Maya, Torres. This is command control. Step outside with hands visible." She looked at him. "Orders." He smiled faintly. "Let's go greet the audience." The air outside was hot, windless. Dust swirled around their boots as they stepped out, 2 silhouettes against the rising sun. A dozen soldiers in tactical armor stood at the edge of the property, rifles raised. The lead officer stepped forward. "Colonel Briggs, Staff Sergeant Torres, by order of Joint Command. You're being detained for breach of classified operations and unauthorized dissemination of restricted data." Maya said nothing. She stood tall, hands loose at her sides. Briggs's expression didn't change. "You forgot the part about the illegal human trials." The officer hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Then he spoke more quietly. "Sir, you've seen the feeds, commands denying everything." Briggs nodded once. "They always do." Behind the soldiers, a 4th helicopter landed. The door opened, and from it stepped General Halvorsen. Alive, composed, smiling. "Colonel," he said, his voice carrying over the wind, "you made quite the mess." Maya's jaw tightened. "You set this in motion." He regarded her with calm disdain. "You think the world cares about a few misplaced test logs. The truth doesn't matter without control." Briggs took a step forward. "Control's the only thing you've ever cared about." Halvorsen shrugged. "Someone has to." His tone was almost gentle, the way a man might talk to a child who didn't yet understand how the world worked. "You can shoot wind, Torres," he said, turning to her. "But you can't stop it from moving where it wants. This will all fade. A headline, a scandal. A week from now, people will scroll past it." Maya met his gaze, steady as steel. "Maybe, but the right kind of wind can tear down a wall." For the first time, the general's expression hardened. He gestured to his men. "Take them." The soldiers moved forward. Briggs didn't resist. He glanced at Maya, and in that single look she understood everything, the unspoken plan, the contingency they hadn't discussed but both had prepared for. She waited until the nearest soldier reached for her wrist. Then she moved. One step, one pivot, one motion of controlled violence, not chaos, not rage, just precision. She twisted, dropped, and the man's weapon hit the dirt. The other soldiers reacted instantly, rifles snapping up, but Briggs was already speaking, loud and sharp. "Stand down." The sound froze them. His tone wasn't a plea, it was command, pure and absolute. "General Halvorsen," he barked. "These are your men. Tell them who they're serving. The people who wear the uniform or the ones who buy it." Halvorsen hesitated, jaw tight. The soldiers glanced between them, uncertain now. The tension hung like a drawn bowstring. Maya didn't blink. Every breath, every heartbeat, every shift of air registered in her mind. The general broke the silence first. "Enough of this, you're both." He didn't finish. A second helicopter appeared on the horizon, smaller, faster, unmarked, heading straight for the ridge. The soldiers turned, confusion breaking formation. Briggs's radio crackled. A familiar voice came through. "Command transport, this is Joint Intelligence Liaison. Stand down immediately. Orders from the Secretary of Defense. Repeat, stand down." Halvorsen's face went pale. He reached for his comm, but Briggs spoke first, almost gently. "You should have checked your six, General. You're not the only one who knows how to leak a file." The smaller chopper landed hard, dust whipping through the air. Two agents stepped out, real command insignia gleaming on their shoulders. "General Halvorsen," one said coldly, "you're under arrest for unauthorized human experimentation, treason, and obstruction." For the first time, Halvorsen looked unsure, truly unsure. He turned toward Maya. "You think you've won?" She met his gaze. "No, sir, I think the truth did." The agents cuffed him and led him toward the transport. He didn't look back. Hours later, the farmhouse was empty except for two figures sitting on the porch. The wind carrying the smell of dust and rain. Briggs leaned back in the old wooden chair, the faintest ghost of relief in his posture. "You realize they'll spin it anyway," he said. "Media, politics. Someone will write a new version by tomorrow." "I know. Doesn't bother you." She smiled faintly. "We don't fight for versions, sir. We fight for the truth that outlives them." He nodded slowly. "You've come a long way from the woman who stood quiet in my briefing room." "I didn't stand quiet," she said softly. "I was just waiting for the right shot." He laughed, the sound rough but real. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that no longer needed to be filled. Finally he said, "You know they'll want you back." She shook her head. "I'm done being part of someone else's story." He studied her for a moment, then said, "Then write your own." She turned to him. "What about you?" Briggs looked toward the horizon, where the sun sank behind the ridges. "Men like me don't write stories, Torres. We make sure people like you get to finish theirs." She wanted to say something, to thank him, to apologize, to acknowledge everything they'd survived, but no words felt worthy. So she just nodded, eyes shining faintly in the dying light. He smiled. "There it is, that silence again, your best weapon." She looked at the rifle leaning against the wall, not the only one anymore. He raised his cup in mock salute, "To the quiet ones." She raised her water canteen in return, "To the ones who listen before they speak." The wind picked up, soft, patient, endless. Weeks later, she stood alone on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The uniform was gone. Her dog tags hung from a thin chain around her wrist. The world had moved on, investigations, hearings, new directives, a dozen promises to ensure accountability. But beneath the noise, something had changed. People had started asking questions. Young recruits spoke her name in training halls. Commanders quoted her after-action lines in briefings. She didn't belong to the army anymore. But she belonged to something larger now, a quiet kind of legacy. She knelt, opened her rifle case, and took out the weapon that had carried her through war, exile, and truth. She ran her hand along the barrel one last time. Then she set it down on the ground, facing east. "Thank you," she whispered, "for teaching me how to see." A gust of wind lifted across the cliff, carrying her words into the vastness below. She stood, eyes on the horizon. The world was still broken, still loud, still learning. but somewhere in its chaos she had found her stillness. And that was enough. Because sometimes victory isn't a sound. It's a silence that changes everything. The camera of her life, if there had been one, would have pulled back slowly, the ocean stretching infinite behind her, the wind whispering through the grass like applause for those who never asked for it. Her voice, soft, certain, would have been the last thing the audience heard. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Fade to black. Wind. Silence. Then nothing but the echo of a story that refused to die.